Hello greater YouTube area and the surrounding internet regions, this is Killer Cardinal DA7. So, this past November we had our most recent presidential election. The political landscape is on the brink of chaos before the campaign, but seeing the results of the election and what's taken place since, I'd finally gotten to a point where I needed to take the deepest look at my own stances that I'd ever taken, as well as look at how my stances and attitude interact with others. The DA in my name stands for Devil's Advocate, as I'm constantly compelled to question arguments, but I realized that during the campaign, I was arguing with people I agree with way more than people I disagree with. It's one thing to discuss issues with friends and loved ones, sharing ideas, exchanging notes. It's entirely another to full out argue with them regularly just to do it. It was counterproductive and straining on my relationships. I began to feel extremely conflicted. It turned into an obsession to figure out why I was acting this way, and during my examination, I stumbled on some startling epiphanies about how people identify politically. In digging deep into the motives of conservatives and liberals, for instance, I came to realize that both seem to place an immense amount of stock in the same entity, that being intangibles, namely belief and emotion. Conservatives tend to believe, while liberals tend to feel. Now, before I go any deeper on this, I want to acknowledge that, that sounds like two sweeping generalizations, and instead of just saying, not all liberals, not all conservatives, I do want to take a moment to point out the exceptions. One perfect example that covers both is the ongoing bedlam between Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. On one side, you have conservatives mourning the loss of law enforcement officers. Sure, much of the visibility Blue Lives Matter gets is of angry people who are pissed at quote-unquote thugs, but there are at least some conscious believers showing emotion, leaving memorials, holding vigils, etc. On the other side, you have liberals gathering every fact, statistic, and piece of evidence and proof that the system is working against them. Black Lives Matter has plenty of emotion driving it, but it also has people who are staying as logical as possible how their fate is playing out and trying to use facts to prove their points. Both sides occasionally show each other's tendencies, but I'll get into that more near the end of the video. What I do know is, every single day we see arrogant posturing on social media and overconfident parroting of other people's words. Words that are usually not questioned, not analyzed, not double-checked, and mostly used to prove one's own beliefs and feelings are true. As for me, I'm finding it more and more difficult to ignore the patterns and common threads and behaviors and groups that I observe. In this video, I'm going to attempt to describe each side. I'm going to try to do it respectfully, but this being the internet, I'm sure the perception will be that I failed miserably, but I am going to try, and then I'm going to analyze each one. My aim here is not to shit all over the two biggest political ideologies in the world. My aim is to understand both, so that eventually I can try to translate one side's goals into something the other side can relate to. Feel free to disagree, I welcome it. So, let's start with conservatives. From what I've observed lately, conservatives in America tend to be motivated by two main things: tradition and religion. Some conservatives seem to have a leaning, but they still usually include both aspects. A conservative might be mostly traditional, however, if they're traditional enough, they're likely religious in some way. If they're religious, they probably believe in one or more things traditional American conservatives believe. Spare the rod, spoil the child. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. An eye for an eye. Love it or leave it. Families consisting of one mommy, one daddy, one son, one daughter, and a pet, preferably a dog. A big one. An aversion to any recreational intoxicants except good old-fashioned alcohol, cars that run on crude oil-based gasoline, the right to bear as many arms as one can afford, climate being reliably hot in the south, cold in the north, and never change from that dynamic except during seasons. Even if these particular beliefs are only several decades old for modern Americans, they're still stuck to harder and harder each day because of the belief that that's how things have always been and that's how they should continue to be. Those things are what it means to be an American. That conscious loyalty to belief. That's what I see driving this side. The way I look at it, beliefs start with words that attempt to explain how the world works. And most traditional conservatives believe many of those words are put together by trustworthy sources. The Word of God, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the law. These things, which have existed for centuries, are then further interpreted into more common beliefs. The belief that God is watching us at all times, punishing those who deserve it and rewarding those who are faithful. The belief that the government is looking out for us and protecting our best interests. The belief that law enforcement is always acting for the greater good and any action taken by them is justified and lawful. The belief that certain sources of news, fact, information, and proof are always telling the truth and should be supported unconditionally as good patriots should, because other sources are conspiring against you and can't be trusted. Belief in these things is constantly defended, and when those beliefs gain enough strength, they become reality. When things like that are real, it's easy to feel peace of mind and comfort. Thing is, many of those beliefs have evidence mounting against them that can either completely disprove those beliefs or at least cast some doubt to show them as less virtuous or real than assumed. That should be enough to keep beliefs as more of a personal matter, but instead those beliefs become identity, and these days, as I've said, there's just no fucking with people's identities. You either believe or you don't. You're either with us or against us. Personally, I'm an agnostic, but I want to be fair to religious people here. If God were to show himself to everyone on the planet simultaneously and perform miracles, smiting people with omnipotent power over the elements, healing the sick with a wave of his hand, changing the landscape and terrain of the entire earth for every single person to witness in real time, then you know what? I'd worship that. It'd be really hard to argue with God impacting everyone's lives in that direct a way, I'll be honest. But that's not happening right now and isn't likely to happen in the future. Even if the universe was created by one or more celestial beings, none of them are taking action, and if they are, those actions are nowhere near as impactful or hard to ignore as the ones I described a moment ago. Now, if you yourself are a believer in organized religion, please make note of this. I'm not leaving any of these things out as a possibility. I'm just not counting on them happening simply because a book says it's possible or because a strong enough believer makes that assumption. If it happens tomorrow, different story. I guess we'll see what happens on that. In the meantime, I'll gladly defend your ability and freedom to believe whatever you want, regardless of how much I disagree. But there needs to be some modicum of accommodation for people who don't believe what you do, especially if there's no proof that what you believe is actually real. Now, liberals, they see things just a bit differently. They see America in a constant state of flux, always on the drawing board to be changed, improved, or progress forward. Liberals look at how much people struggle and their hearts go out, and they seek to fix that struggle. They defend those who can't defend themselves. They protect people all over the world who are under attack, under fire, under constant scrutiny. They see people in pain, people with no money or very little, people who are sick, suffering, hungry, disabled, unfairly treated, in direct danger, and their hearts go out, and they feel motivated to fix those things too. They hear things that are said, and their hearts go out to the people who are offended, and they seek to change things like common language and behavior so that those people never have to feel victimized ever again. Victimization, suffering, damage to people's feelings. These are things that most liberals want to eliminate, and on the surface, they seem like good-natured causes to take up. There are thousands of people all over the world who are victimized on a daily basis, and most of the time they do need help, protection, and support. However, unlike belief, feelings don't begin with words. Feelings are more fluid and ambiguous. They happen inside a person, most are involuntary, and they're open to personal interpretation. They get described using words chosen to illustrate them, and in many cases, those words don't tell the whole story. The words that are chosen are just the most powerful ones to get others to empathize. So when liberals constantly cite hate as the cause of most problems in America, or better yet, claim they're being slighted because others hate them, the lack of dedication to understanding sometimes shows through. This isn't to say that hate doesn't exist. It does. People in groups who perpetuate and embrace true hatred of other people just because other people are being other people can be terrifying. I just think there's way more to most average adult problems than just hate. For instance, I don't consider tradition or religion adequate enough reasons to deny people basic human rights, but conservatives aren't immediately hateful for those two things. Different conservatives may respond to certain issues differently. If you ask one religious conservative how they feel about homosexuality, chances are fair they might say something like, well, I'm a Christian, and Scripture says that homosexuality is a sin. Depending on the amount of melancholy in that person's voice, like if they groan or if they say it in a low tone, they might be telling you that yes, that is what the Scripture says, but they may not entirely agree with it. Now, if you ask a different religious conservative how they feel about homosexuality, you might hear, fags burn in hell. That's hateful. That's using a spiritual rule set, which, by the way, encourages people in its most prominent stone tablet rule book to love thy neighbor as an excuse to justify being mean-spirited, disrespectful, and hurtful. Being religious or having beliefs doesn't equal hate, but the actions or inactions those beliefs inspire, they're always up for interpretation. Emotion is the most common catalyst to twist just about any message from the equivalent of a simple fender bender into first-degree murder. And the funny thing is, even though emotion is more tangible than religious faith, it can still often be decoded. Psychology, psychotherapy, brain exams, etc. All these things can be used to determine where various emotions come from, what happened in a person's life to cause them to feel certain things or connect with people they may not know or may never meet, why they think certain actions or reactions are the best course of action even when they could be entirely counterproductive, why they fall in love with certain people and hate other certain people, etc. Liberals constantly push science when arguing with conservatives over climate change and evolution, and being agnostic, I'm inclined to support that approach. But interestingly, when it comes to decoding emotion, liberals kind of leave science by the wayside and instead support people in whatever they're feeling. Calling out the insensitivity of others is more important than figuring out why that insensitivity matters to a person at all. You either feel what we feel or you don't. You're either with us or against us. Deja fucking vu. Both of these sides, conservatives and liberals, seem to put all their chips on these intangibles of belief and emotion. But what's even more interesting, I'm watching behavior start to mesh together. Each side is kind of stealing each other's style. For instance, liberals are usually fans of art and expression and creativity, but when art is labeled as offensive, insensitive, or worse yet, hate speech, they typically believe it should be taken down or eliminated, which is usually a practice that conservatives support because art and individual expression tends to question common beliefs. Then, of course, you have disrespectful, mocking, and insulting expression attacking conservatives. Suddenly, that same magnitude of expression is okay, convenient. Censorship on the whole is a harsh, unfair practice, right? Unless certain people are hurt by it, bothered by it, or scared of it, and then it's justified. Personally, I support all art and expression regardless of the political leaning. That means some of that expression is going to be about things that I don't feel comfortable seeing, or maybe it presents ideas I disagree with, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I want others to express themselves in those ways, and I encourage people to do it regardless of my fucking comfort level. If you believe or feel something, you should be able to express it. Even if it's against the government, even if it's against tradition and common practice, even if it makes some people feel ashamed or even bad about themselves or insulted. Worst case scenario, it starts conversation or motivates you or me to ask ourselves important questions about how we feel. Just because we feel uncomfortable doesn't make the artist wrong. Hopefully, while expressing yourself, you're open to other people's ideas and reactions and feedback so that your expression and insight can grow and evolve and change over time. And the same going the other way, when you react to someone's art or expression, you can respond and give feedback to that artist. They can evolve as well. Or bare fucking minimum, we can all just deal with other people having the same freedom to express themselves as freely as we want. On the other hand, conservatives are usually the ones with the consciously formed beliefs, not driven by fluid impulse or fickle emotion. Like I said, they're constructed, they're formed with words. And yet, more and more lately, conservatives are playing the hurt, downtrodden victims, or some kind of fringe minority constantly feeling judged and suppressed for what they believe. What was the first thing that Donald Trump said during the first presidential debate? We're losing. Is that true? Are you personally losing anything? And if so, what are you losing? Your ability to exclude yourself from people you don't like? Alright, I'll be honest, I can empathize with that a bit, as I'm normally pretty socially awkward and insecure, but how do you define people I don't like? Do you have a specific definition of that type of person? There's no definitive way to tell whether Joe and Jane, every human in front of us online at the grocery store, seem like perfectly safe, normal people, aren't the kinkiest, most freaky sexual deviants on the planet, or the most pious, God-fearing Christians to ever kneel before the Lord. The fact is, unless you talk to them and get to know them, you or I will never know. But because they look the part, you might believe they're good, and they get some kind of pass from the same scrutiny you'd give someone who might not 100% look that part. You don't think there are Bible toters covered in tattoos? You don't think there are wild sex addicts who live in sweater vests and khakis? Belief in that illusion of safety and security ends up being far more comforting than the feeling of vulnerability and the lack of control or defense against a harsh, unknown world. I'll grant you that. That's fair. But yet, taking the offensive and judging others due to those beliefs doesn't lend much weight to conservatives being downtrodden victims in any kind of way. Liberals and conservatives hate each other for this factor of intangibles, and they're mirroring each other more and more as time goes by. If it's okay for them to do it, it's okay for me to do it. But there is one factor that divides these two groups even further, one that I welcome anyone hearing this to challenge because it cannot possibly break down to this level as easily. And yet the more I think about both groups, the more I keep coming back to this same little forward mantra. Liberals defy, conservatives obey. Simple idea, but definitely needs explanation. So, due diligence, here we go. I'm not implying that either one of those things, defiance or obedience, is better or worse than the other, or you should be doing one more than the other. Both carry pros and cons, much like the belief versus emotion argument. There are certainly exceptions. An assault weapon toting militia thinking the government is out to get them, that's a bunch of conservatives that likely isn't doing much obeying. And when special interest groups hear about something in the entertainment industry, something insensitive happened in a game, a movie, a TV show, someone tweeted something offensive, someone gets caught on camera ranting and raving, it can occasionally form rhetoric that gets obeyed with as much zealous dedication as Bible scripture. So yes, there are exceptions to that mantra. Personally, I don't view obedience as innately bad. Society does need laws and rules to keep order and some department or method of enforcing those rules. Laws in general are often seen as restrictions, but some types, like traffic laws, are just guidelines that encourage safety. Obviously, not all laws are cut and dry though. Plenty of laws bring about bad consequences, and they need to be questioned to determine if the intended result of a particular law is coming to fruition, or if that law is completely failing to do what it's supposed to do and needs to be changed. If there isn't enough questions being asked about laws that are yielding completely faulty results, yet they're left alone because tradition, then maybe some defiance becomes necessary. On the other hand, most of my liberal friends are in a frenzy these days, protesting every single day or week on the front lines, fighting with everything they have for the rights of the people. This is America. We all have a right to fight for what we feel is just and fair, but at what exact point will the defiers be finished? Do most really know what it would take to achieve full victory? I'm not saying this country is in good shape right now or that they shouldn't be pushing for change. I'm just opening my mind to what the world needs to look like to bring about a healthy enough balance so that nothing needs defying anymore. I'm not telling liberals to shut up and take the abuse the world hands out. I want the problems they fight to be resolved so that the need for rebellion diminishes. For laws and policy to beget order, we all need to agree on which laws and policies are fair and which aren't, which laws make us safest and which put us in more danger. When we don't agree on things as basic as that, the question of what laws should exist and what shouldn't exist arises, which leads to people debating what should be punishable and what shouldn't be, which leads to either loud, blaring arguments, almost all of which are counterproductive, or massive amounts of justified judgment. What is grounds for a jail sentence or capital punishment? What is bad enough behavior to fire someone from their job over? What is worth smearing and bloodying someone's public image over? Which soon goes from what is worthy of judgment to what can we judge someone over? What do we get to judge someone over? Small semantic differences, huge ramifications, baby steps in all the wrong directions, and minimizing the most extreme actions because, well, not enough is being done to fix the problem, whatever you believe or feel the problem might be. Patriotic levels of obedience and loyalty to the current system are very admirable. I hope we can all feel a grand sense of patriotism one day in my lifetime. But that obedience doesn't factor in any wiggle room to accept very real problems people are dealing with every day. Then again, while constant defiance and assault on the status quo does potentially lead to the possibility of maybe meandering in peace's direction someday far in the future, no guarantees, it also means that we could land on a peaceful solution, then take off immediately and fly right into a brand new war full of infighting and more disagreement. Sometimes we need to stop and acknowledge the tiny slivers of camaraderie that pop up. We need that. We desperately need that to reassure us that our country can actually function in a healthy way with all of us living here at the same time, like simultaneously coexisting or some shit. People managed to unite for about 8.5 seconds after 9/11, and things quickly devolved from there. I know 16 years may not seem all that quick, but in terms of history, it's a drop in the bucket. It's been my theory for a while that 9/11 pushed most Americans' vulnerabilities and fears beyond any semblance of breaking point, and since then, those vulnerabilities and fears, at least for some, haven't been adequately repaired. For others, the problems just morphed and changed and became more visible. Brief story time. Maybe you remember this one. Our comfortable, peaceful way of life was shattered. For a moment afterward, we all comforted each other. Then, we all reacted. Conservatives believed we needed to fight back, and for a little bit, liberals agreed while still mourning. Eventually, the military action went on far too long, and liberals wanted it stopped. Conservatives believed we were still in danger. Liberals got angry at conservatives. Conservatives countered with different anger, and the anger has only built since then. Back and forth, back and fucking forth, with nothing to fill the void that anger would leave, and going largely unquestioned as a result. I want the right questions to be asked for a change. I want to set a new example, and I want to weed out the truth. Unfortunately, with so few willing to agree, truth is often up for debate. Truth should be the salve that heals us. Instead, it's like putting Bactine on an injury. It hurts, so people tend to hate it. Well, I want to be the cleric that heals that wound. I can't say my way won't hurt, at least not in the same way Bactine does, but hopefully I can get people to see that more than likely I support them in their fight. I want to be an entity that people feel comfortable speaking with and sharing their story with because they know that even if I ask questions, I do still support their side. I'm a firm believer in the idea that you can ask almost any question you want as long as you develop a good rapport and you do it tactfully and respectfully as possible. Questioning a person doesn't mean you're threatening them, it just means you want to get to know them better so that you can help them better. I know, I'm just asking for trouble, aren't I? Let's see if I can handle it. This is Killer Cardinal DA7. Talk to you soon.
There. That's right. Shake out the sand. But remember, not all of it. And I'll tell you the story.
Tenno, what is this? How are you doing that?